Hey guys, Andy Spoken Label back in the house on a glorious Sunday afternoon. It's glorious round here today. Britain's or the UK is about to hit a heat wave next weekend. It's my birthday tomorrow and it's meant to be 27, 28 degrees on Monday and Tuesday. So, yes, I will not be wearing a jacket on that day for sure with it. So, now we're over to meet a friend of ours today and I met this lady. We were just working out, Lucy, weren't we, about 6 years ago now,
Mm.
weren't we? In your Sonics for Shakespeare project. So, and
Yeah, a
it's
blast from
like,
the past there.
it was that one, because, yeah, completely. I can, obviously, what I do, Lucy, I'll probably best you introduce yourself to everybody in a second. But I remember when I met you on the Sonics for Shakespeare project, I wrote about three sonnets in my life before then, and I ended up writing a fourth one, especially for that project. And oh, it was pretty hard work that was as well. So, but we're over to an area in Germany today, and I didn't know Lucy, my friend today, was actually in Germany now. How long have you been living just outside of Bonn then, Lucy?
Yeah, we moved over at the end of 2018. So,
I
yeah, a
didn't
fair
know that.
while ago now.
Yeah, it was a fair while ago then, wasn't it?
Um,
Yeah.
fair while ago. And it's been, yes, it's been it's taken a while to settle in. But
Mm.
we're there now. Yeah, and the kids are well settled and yeah, it's great. It's a beautiful green part of Germany where we are in the Rhineland, down by the river, with mountains, river, all of that good stuff, beer.
Course, of course. So if you're
All
living
good.
where you're living where you are, because I've been on beer cruises around near Bonn, and yeah, it's a good, there's good fish beer. That's for sure with it. So, but yeah, and obviously we're not here to talk about Bonn or beer. If we were, we'd probably be here all afternoon talking about notes on it. No, obviously talk about your poetry. Now, I think I want you to take us back in time first of all for yourself. Now, obviously, I know you had 20-year legal careers. You were writing before that, weren't you? And obviously, you returned to your writing after your legal career and still after a serious illness. So, can you tell us about what made you want to return to your writing after such a gap?
Yeah, and I think that like many people, I'd written as a young woman, as a young person, and then life, adulting got in the way, and I became a lawyer, did that for a long time, and then I was diagnosed with breast cancer. Um, Doing all right now. I do still have ongoing treatment that I have to have, but I'm doing generally all right. And I during chemo turned back to poetry because sometimes that was all I could manage was reading a page of poetry. Um, and that was like, really went back to things that I'd studied as a young woman. So, my Emily Dickinson and that kind of era of poetry, Lovell, Victorian, the Brontes and all of that, but couldn't manage a whole novel. So Emily Dickinson it was. And yeah, from there I started writing uh, really for therapeutic reasons at the beginning, just writing through my own experiences and trying to process things really. And then I did a workshop with Jason Conway, um, who's wonderful.
Oh,
And
I've got a podcast coming
at
up with
the
him.
end,
I've got a podcast coming up with him as well, actually. I didn't know that.
oh, have you?
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
sort of
Jason.
currently
Jason's
sorting it out at
brilliant.
the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, he's lovely, and he was very supportive and very encouraging of my poetry, and said, "Why don't I think you should carry on with that." Um, and so I started taking it a bit more seriously, and that resulted in a manuscript that became eventually um, my first pamphlet, "We Wear the Crown," which won the Hedgehog poetry competition in 2021 and came out in 2022. Um, yeah, and that was about my breast cancer experience, but also the aftermath of that, piecing together a life, figuring things out in this new constellation of managing health issues, family commitments, and so on. The kind of loss and the recovery that I think everybody going through cancer would probably recognize some part of. Yeah.
No, people has gone through it straight away. But yeah, I agree. Now, people are wondering,
Mm.
obviously, this was published back in August 2022, wasn't it? So, and then obviously in passing, because like I know you've had another one out, another collection out as well with, I'm just going for my notes, trying to find my notes now. It's difficult,
With the
isn't it?
broken
With a broken
spine.
spine. Sorry, sorry,
Yeah.
Alan. Yeah, I know Alan Parry that runs his broker is one of the people in the broken spine. Lost my notes in for a minute. Loggerheads. Now, did Loggerheads, was that come after that collection and did it? Was it always planned to be a second collection, like you'd called second chapbook?
Um, it was, I think, mainly because I saw that Alan was running his chapbook competition, and I'd done a few open mics with Alan. Really enjoyed the way he seems to approach life and poetry, and the way he was trying to build a community there with the Broken Spine. Had no expectation of winning the chapbook competition, but I put a manuscript together. That one came together fairly quickly because it was mainly just drafts that I already had
Hmm.
on the go. But I pulled them together with this overarching theme of well, I'm someone who tends to feel like life's a bit of a battle and you're always struggling to make yourself understood. So that was my working basis for that manuscript, and thankfully Alan saw something in it, worked really well with me to develop it, and he's a really, really strong editor.
Heard that. I've
So
heard that before. I've had
yeah, so
one or two people have been involved with their press before now. I've heard nothing but good stuff said about them.
yeah, he's really, really a lovely person to work with. Yeah, so that came out actually in 2 days' time. It will be its book birthday.
Oh
So
wow!
yeah,
Oh, fantastic! I did not know
yeah.
that.
So
Oh,
those were the previous two. I can show you. They'll be back to front on my screen, but that's those two.
oh wow! Now, if people are watching us on YouTube or Instagram, they will see both of them get shown here, and they're both fantastic covers, aren't they, as well? So,
Yeah, this We
oh,
Wear the Crown I designed, and then Alan and I collaborated to do this one. And there tends to be this quite a feeling of movement
yeah, you
and
got that
colour.
straight away. Yeah, you're very, even though the colours are different, and I'm colourblind with this one, you can see that there's a theme in it with the colours, and I can definitely tell, definitely you in that one. So now I said I've not read either of those two collections, although I don't doubt they're excellent. The one I have read is your new book with Yaffle Press. Now, have you got that one with us so we can show people the cover first of
Yeah,
all?
I have. It's just behind me here on the shelf as well.
Subtle
To
plug there,
forgive,
definitely.
this one's got all my flags all over it, but there
That's
she is.
incredible, that is, yeah. Now, people want to know the book's called Daughter of Fire. Now, I've got a lot I want to ask Lucy about this. 'Cause I've been reading this last couple of weeks. It's one that is a really, really good collection as well. And you were telling me before, weren't you, on this one? This has took you a couple of years to get this book together.
Yeah, it came about, I think, about 4 years ago, maybe even a bit longer. I was watching The Hollow Crown, the Shakespeare adaptation from the BBC with my husband. And then back to back, for some reason, we then watched The White Queen, which is a Philippa Gregory book and TV adaptation. And in both of those, this character of Margaret of Anjou, this 15th century medieval queen, appeared. And she was I loved both the actresses, by the way, absolutely adore both of their performances, but they were obviously given this note to emphasize how grim and determined this lady of history was. And she really could be seen as quite humorless and quite um, emotionless, relentless. And I started, and she certainly never smiled. And that was something that I was thinking about already, with this idea of how women are expected to behave in a certain way and to be demure and so on, and to not strike out for their own ambitions. And I
Yeah,
just got really angry and just went and kind of filled with grief and rage for her, and just wanted to almost retell her story. With all due respect to Shakespeare, he has rather done her down, maybe unintentionally, over the years.
well,
Um,
different
and that's
generation,
the
wasn't it, basically? Yeah,
reputation.
so,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's it. And that's the reputation that she's had over 5 centuries. And so I wanted to really kind of reframe her story, and also then give her a new legacy, a new third act, if you will.
Yeah. Now, I'll say that if people look at the book, it's split into three sections. Little Creatures, Strong-Willed Women, and my favourite title here, I Sing a Woman and a Powerful Queen, on the title alone. Now, what made you want to split the book into three different sections?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked me that. Yeah, so I was inspired by a wonderful poet, Ruth Purdell, whose work, and she's done, I think, about 9 or 10 or even more collections already. But the one that really spoke to me and gave me an idea of how to structure my collection was the Beethoven variations.
Oh, yes.
And Ruth had very cleverly, with her understanding of musical structures, taken a kind of musical basis for structuring that into parts. And that made me think, well, I'm retelling a Shakespearean heroine here in a new light. And so I took my structure as a 3-act structure, like as if it was a play,
Ah,
basically.
right. Brilliant.
So
No,
the
it makes
first
sense. Makes
two,
sense.
yeah. So the first two are quite straightforwardly retelling this Margaret's story and through snapshots almost of different parts of her story, but focusing on those parts which the chronicles and the histories tend to ignore. So it's not very much about battles and there's politics, but not in a kind of formal sense, because of course women, even powerful women, were not in those conversations in the room. And so it became important to focus on the moments between the big set pieces and how might Margaret have responded to those. So that's the first two. So I've gone right the way back to her childhood and the formative influences in her life. I won't spoil it, as I'm sure we'll talk about those in a bit. But then the third chapter, the third act, I really wanted to take it well beyond the she-wolf stereotype of this fearsome queen and to follow the stories of other wayward women through time. And, it will come as no surprise, there's plenty of them.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it was
So
hard to choose which ones.
belting stories there. There is. Yeah, like I said, I told you off camera before. I was pretty good at history at school, and I was a big interest in it. And I knew most of the people that were referred to in this third part, particular. Not all of them. I mean, there's at least one or two of them. I was sat there thinking, "Wow!" So straight away, it was great stories. Now, I want to learn first of all, obviously, because you've done an epigram to the collection first of all, with some lines from Sarah Connor's poem, Always Fire. What made you want to use this extract from Sarah's poem?
Oh, thank you for asking that. Yeah, Sarah was a dear friend and also a stablemate at Sídhe Press, where Sarah was a very much a formative part of Sídhe Press coming to in existence. And she and I also shared an experience of cancer, although sadly Sarah's went right to the end of her life. She struggled with it and fought against it for years. And then sadly we lost her at the end of last year.
Yeah,
Um,
I read that, spread that.
but
Yeah.
yeah, and so before that, until during the course of the last year of her life, Sarah was immensely kind to me. And one of the poems in her collection, Always Fire, really spoke to me. And that was this poem, Always Fire. And Sarah just was such a generous, supportive, positive energy, and gave me this idea of fire and being true to yourself, whatever other people may think of it, as a kind of theme to draw the poems in this collection together. And so I asked Sarah if she would do me the honour of letting me use this couplet from her poem in the preface to the book, and she said yes, and I was delighted that she did. It's quite sorry, I get a bit emotional talking about Sarah because she was such a dear woman.
Yeah, it's a great quote at the beginning of the book. It is absolute belting quote, and it really adds a lot to it straight away. Straight away. Now, I was really interested in learning as well. Obviously, the next thing I want to ask you about is the prologue that comes just afterwards. The prologue, glory. Now, obviously, considering this is really a poetry book, what this is here is like it's almost like prose. So, what made you want to start the book off in it? I think quite a different voice to what follows in the book, but it works.
Yeah. A couple of reasons. I think, first of all, I was very mindful that Margaret of Anjou is not that well known. She is now studied a bit in school, but certainly in my day, going
I'm mine.
back
I'm mine. Yeah.
a few years, she wasn't really. And if you learned anything about medieval history, it tended to be the great kings and the battles. And then when you look at the queens of history who have become very famous, so the Anne Boleyns and so on, those stories don't need a big preamble to explain them, because you can sort of assume that people have an idea. Margaret, on the other hand, if she's known at all, she's known these days as either Shakespeare's She-Wolf of France or as the inspiration for Cersei Lannister in Game of Thrones.
Oh,
But much
I've
more.
never seen Game of Thrones actually, Tom. I'll speak to
Have you
Amanda about
not?
that later. Amanda, my wife, she loved Game of Thrones. Hated the ending,
Yeah,
but I'll ask her about that later.
yeah. So yeah, so my feeling was that I needed some clear um, grounding near to the beginning, some context of who this woman might be. And I also didn't want to just go, oh, here's her story and trot it out exactly chronologically. So I wanted to grab a powerful moment in her story, which happens to be this almost Elizabeth I-esque moment of trying to inspire the men on the battlefield before one of her big fights, as a kind of demonstration, a shortcut of showing her in her full pomp and glory. Yeah, so I thought that would be a fitting starting point, although we then go right the way back to the beginning of her story.
Yeah, no, it does. It works really well. Sometimes you need to do that sort of thing. And I found it really interesting. The first, well, proper poem in the book there was linked into a Jackson Pollock painting, The She-Wolf, which again I've heard of. Because I did writing at university, but I know somebody in the art team that used to absolutely love Jackson Pollock, and I do know this painting. So I take it, did you always like this painting, or was it a one that you discovered during your research in the book?
It's a painting that I was aware of, but hadn't spent any real time
Hmm.
studying.
Hmm.
Um, and it's not on display actually at
Oh, is it
MoMA
not? No. Oh,
in New
wow.
York.
Hmm.
No, it's on their website. If anyone wants to look at it, just Google She-Wolf MoMA New York. But one of the real joys of this particular project, and one of the reasons it's taken me so long, was that I was thinking very much about what source material there is, because, as I've said, the kind of chronicles were written by, well, mainly by monks or by people who were politically connected to one family or another, and they generally focused on the great male figures and didn't report on what the women were doing. And so what I've had to do with this book, or what I wanted to do, was to focus on other source material and other inspirations to fill in some of those gaps and silences. And so I couldn't resist it. You know, we're talking about She-Wolf of France, and here's this painting called She-Wolf. And it also spoke to me about presenting a strong female figure, but also starting to think about what the implications of being that strong female figure is. The other real thing with that painting for me, having read into it a fair bit, was that he was painting that during the Second World War, and so although my poem is focusing on the kind of battliness that you have to have as a woman walking through the world, and the threats that a woman in particular faces, it's important that we are in a time of war right now, and Jackson Pollock painted that painting also at a time of war, and Margaret was also living through and trying to influence a time of war. So I think that comes through whatever we're writing. We're writing from our current experience, and so I think, in my opinion, you can't really ignore the fact that the world is a place of conflict and fear right now.
Yeah,
How do
it's
we
definitely.
find and how do we live through that?
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. It's not easy with a stretch of thought. So it's a great start for the book, that one itself. Now, the next poem I want to ask you about, this is one person I hadn't heard of before, actually. And there is a few of them. And I'll just move down the page here, see? Is the poem Where Are All the Women? Right, we talked about Christine I'm not even going to pronounce this right. She's Christine de Pazzo, was it? Which is the first professional female writer in Europe. You showed me like it. It was fascinating. This one. I hadn't come across this before. Born obviously in 1364 to 1430. This is a real. I like the way this poem was done because there's parts in italics and it's obviously like the voices are different, but I think it works really, really well. This. So where did the idea for this poem come from?
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you like it. Yeah. Um, and I think this is one of the early poems in the book, and I felt it was quite important to set Margaret. You know, she didn't just appear; she had these influences, and as a an educated, noble woman, she would have had access to her family library, and one of the books that people are pretty sure that she would have had access to was the book of the City of Ladies by Christine de Pizan. And Christine, these days, she tends to be presented as a some kind of sort of pre-feminist,
Mm.
proto-feminist author. I think she was herself fighting to survive. Her husband had died unexpectedly and very young, and left her with a family to provide for, and debts to pay off. So she became a writer almost out of necessity, but also out of this urge to defend women from the ongoing literary attacks of male writers. So she got into various conversations with male authors of the time, and Margaret would have had this kind of literary influence in her life. But I thought it was anyway an interesting story to tell among all the stories in this book, to tell Christine's own origin story. Because that's partly what this first part of the book is all about, is origins. Now, where do women find this inner strength? And you know, there's a thread that connects women through time, that isn't just, you know, we don't just appear. We're all informed by the women who have gone before. So that's why I included this poem. And the two voices, it's interesting that you pick that up. Margaret Christine
Mm.
has a very strong authorial voice. When you read her, she is herself the character, or the main character in the book is called Christine, and she has a certain voice. But there's a kind of almost a guiding spirit of the book, in these other three figures: reason, rectitude, and justice, who are kind of metaphorical almost, and they speak to her and guide her and have conversations with her about how women have a place in the world, and how they are virtuous, and they are clever and resourceful and resilient, and all of these things. All of these principles would have informed Margaret, in trying to do the right thing as she progressed through her own life, or the right thing as she saw it. Yeah.
No, it makes sense completely. Now, obviously, I could spend all afternoon talking to you about this book, Lucy. I really could, because there are lots. I could talk through nearly every poem question and every poem here. But I was want to talk about a couple each section. So I want to ask you next on to Strong Laboured Woman. Now, the poem that really surprised me here was, and I've not seen one of these done for a while, was the At Last poem.
Mhm.
Now, and I can't remember what the form of this poem is called. It's a circular poem. Now, tell us, re-educate me first of all, because it's been years since I've seen one of these done. What's the form called, and what made you want to do it this way?
Oh, it's a good question. I don't know if it has a particular name, to be honest, but it's almost like a concrete poem in
Yeah,
that
that's it.
the
How's that
the
bit? Yeah.
form is definitely part of the poem. So it's not just lines on a page. This poem is in the form of a circle finding completion. So the words work their way all the way around, like either like a clock face or like a circle, or my original idea for it was like a compass. You know, if I think of anything that's circular that is a guiding influence, that's the kind of idea. It does make it slightly tricky to read on the page. I do accept that, and I talked about that with Yaffle quite a bit, in terms of whether we would also set the poem out traditionally underneath as a stanza. But what we were kind of aiming for with this poem is this sense that Margaret waited 8 years trying to get pregnant, and of course, as a queen consort in medieval times, that was her principal duty. Her main thing that she had to achieve as queen was to provide an heir, ideally an heir and a spare. And when she fell pregnant and eventually had her one and only child, a son, Edward of Westminster, how much relief, joy she must have felt at that, and this sense that she had completed at least this part of her task. And this idea of also circling the wagons, defensively needing to protect something. Now she's got this child that is at the center of everything now that she does from now on. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that was the idea of that.
It kind of follows on to the next poem I was going to ask you about. Actually, pretty spot on that. That shows you how way I think sometimes was woman to woman. Because obviously that is it. There's a couple of poems in this book. There's one where I think it's got French in it, or and on the sideline, which I'm not going to talk about. But woman to woman, I think follows on nicely from that because people will see it. They stand close by her, Ned, my James, two laddies warmed by simple fire. Now they're fed, I will hear the lass, and you like you put your circles on that poem, and I think it flows really well. There's a lot of subtext in this book. So I want to learn about this poem next time because there's some interesting choices of words here straight away.
Yeah, sorry, you broke up a
Oh,
little bit there, Andy. I
oh
didn't
dear.
hear the question. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, sorry, people. People who are following this one on YouTube, you would have heard then. We've had a sound problem. Now, I thought the last poem we talked about follows on really well. So what I want to ask you next is woman to woman. Because woman to woman, I think you just talked about setting your ground. This one, there's a defensive mechanism creeped in this one, where she's creeping a tally tight on the last line, for example, playing a card to her chest. So I want to learn about this poem next.
Yeah, and I must say, I'd like to acknowledge the help of several friends on this one. Lynn Valentine, Charlotte Johnson, David Blyman, all of whom helped me to get the Scots language correct here, or as correct as I could do. So this poem's in the voice of another amazing medieval queen, Mary of Guelders, who was Queen Regent at this point to James, I think James II of Scotland. And Margaret, at a certain point, had no choice but to go and try and negotiate with Mary up in Scotland. Mary's an interesting one because she came from Guelders, which is kind of somewhere between Holland and Belgium these days. So she herself was a foreigner queen, much like Margaret, with a young son to think about and forced into a position of authority, a position that she had to try and take political decisions and work out what the correct thing to do was. The voice here was really interesting because I was thinking, what would she have learned? She certainly would have spoken multiple languages, and she was an intelligent woman. She in my formulation of her, my idea of her may well have been tending towards Scots language to make herself understood in the court that she was surrounded by. And I did want it to be a very distinct voice, so quite different from Margaret's own voice.
Yeah. There's
So
there's a lot in
yeah,
this, but there's a lot in this book. I think because the narrative does flow, all these stories, but you're right, it's distinctive, but it flows, I think.
yeah, that was, I think, finding a unique voice for the different women who appear in the book was one of the challenges, and it's taken a lot of thought to get to a point where I thought, yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to achieve for each of those characters, if you will, each of the women who are presented. So yeah, Margaret was fearsome and determined, but I think Mary equally so. So yeah, keeping her tally tight against all the factors that she had to calculate.
Yeah, and that's why I thought it flowed well because talk about like you found those it's been a very, very political game back then for the women just to survive in a very, I mean, over masculine society at the time. So that's why it's fascinating. So now the most experimental piece in the book for me was London Closed City. Now, I'm curious in this one because I've seen it's almost like you've done a fridge magnet poem here, basically, with lots of little like bits and pieces. But I know it's not. I know there's a form for this. So tell us about London Closed City then, because this is from a letter by an alderman of London in 1460.
Yeah, and can I say, Andy, I'm so fascinated by which poems you've
Oh,
chosen, and
yeah.
you're surprising me, and it's really good because you've chosen some that I haven't yet had a chance to really talk about. So,
Oh, look
um,
at the draw.
really happy to do that. So yeah, London closed city. So at a certain point, in all of these toing and froing battles, that the Wars of the Roses wasn't a single conflict, it was
Hmm.
many, from massive set piece battles to tiny skirmishes. um, and the kind of control and power and victory went one way and then went another. And after Margaret had had a big victory at the Second Battle of St Albans, which I didn't want to show in the book because, as I've said, I didn't want to focus in on the kind of battle scenarios as such. Um, what I wanted to show was Margaret in the aftermath of that and trying to work out what she should do next. And what she tried to do was to enter the gates of London. And the Londoners shut the doors to her. They didn't want her
Ah.
because she'd brought her Scottish troops and some French mercenaries. And in the meantime, her opponents, the Duke of York and his faction, had um, spread rumor and propaganda that she was making her way south, with rage and vengeance in her heart, and her army was completely out of control, and all of this, which was probably true to an extent, but she had very limited money to pay her troops, and therefore, how does an army provision itself? It takes from the villages and towns that it passes through. And so this made her, by this point, pretty unpopular. London got absolutely terrified of this and just shut the gates and said, you might be the Queen, but you're not coming in. So she had a
Right.
decision to make. Would she then force that and put London to siege? And could she even survive that because she had such limited resources? Or would she accept that she had to then retreat back to her own domain and rethink? And this is where I'm glad you mentioned the Christine de Pizan poem earlier on, because those same figures, reason, rectitude, and justice, are very much at the forefront of her mind at this point. Um, but I felt really to bring a new perspective, not to just have Margaret, raging outside the gates. I wanted to show it from inside the city, um, because I think that by this point her reputation was beginning to suffer, um, for reasons right and wrong. Uh, and I wanted to show, maybe from the aldermen's perspective, so the aldermen were the kind of leaders, the kind of political and economic leaders in London, how scared they might well have been, and the kind of thought process of protecting the citizens of London at that point. Um, Margaret's son is also mentioned in the poem. He was growing up to be quite a fearsome young man in his own right, and she taught him that well. But the rumours were that he talked of nothing but cutting off heads. So yeah, it was a challenging time for her, but I wanted to show it also from the other side, to show why the relationship with her own citizens was starting to go sour.
Yeah, no, it makes sense completely with that what you said there with it. So, what made you want to obviously people look at this poem? As I said before, you just cut it all up, haven't you? So, was uh, this must be quite hard for Mark and Jill, obviously Yaffle, how to do the formatting of this poem as well. Was it quite a difficult poem to get finalized? Was it with formatting as well?
Yeah, I mean it's an erasure poem,
Hmm.
really. So under there is a letter from from the burgher, from the alderman, um, and it has, it's talking about various things, but I wanted to draw out this sense of fear, isolation, and so it's a blackout poem, really. Oh, you've
Oh, have I gone again? People are wondering, might be having problems here today with this. Right, so let me see if I can reduce some more internet problems. We are having problems. Okay. Hiya, Lucy. Right.
hello.
I have no idea what happened. And people wondering, yeah, I don't know how this is going to come out, this one yet. So we've had another crash. So this might be part two. So I don't, with Lucy still now. We are back, hopefully. I'm going to try and get this right. So, right, crashing again. So, okay, it does happen with Zoom, unfortunately, sometimes. Now,
Mm.
I was going to ask you next to Lucy. We'll move on, which is a good time, actually, but to crash, actually, to move on to part three, which is I Sing a Woman and a Powerful Queen. Now, I was just about to move down when things crashed on me then, but I want to ask about, obviously, which is I think is an important poem to talk about next is, no, in fact, I want to ask another one as well, first of all, about
Mm.
Margaret, Sophie, and me before we do into the poem I was going to ask you about.
Yeah.
Because I know Sophie's work you're talking about here. So, what's the inspiration behind this poem?
Yeah, and this was this I think this is the first one, isn't it, at the
Yeah,
start of this third
yeah,
act.
third act indeed,
And the
yes.
reason, yeah, and the reason I undenied which order to run things in with this third section. And
Yeah,
there's a number of different ways you could do it, but given the previous two sections were quite had to kind of tell Margaret's less than familiar story in quite almost a chronological way. I wanted this third one to just go, okay, we're back here, full power, um, and to make a bold statement there that this is, we're coming back in now with a lot more of contemporary, modern day considerations. So with Margaret, Sophie, and me, this goes right back to what I was saying about watching The Hollow Crown, the BBC's Shakespeare adaptation from a few years back. And Margaret was played in that by Sophia Conedo, brilliant
yes.
actress who identifies,
Fantastic.
oh,
Honestly, 'cause just
so
I've
good.
seen her three or four things, and she's each one she brings something raw and different to each piece. So I'm interested to learn what. And obviously you've
Mm,
answered already, saying it was a tricky section to sort out this one,
mm,
and I was kind of expecting you to actually put the second one we asked you about in a moment on first, actually, but I thought the like is yeah, you're looking at it from a different angle, so it kind of makes sense.
yeah. Well, it's almost my manifesto. I mean, I'm not a political poet in that sense, but as I said, I think whatever it is you're writing about, your own sense of your own moral compass, your own values, your own obsessions and ideas will come to the front, whatever you're writing about. But this one is probably more overtly um, political almost than almost anything else in the book. And it's really me grappling with this question of whose stories get told and how do they get told and by whom are they told? Because when Sophie Okonedo was cast as Queen Margaret, there was a sadly predictable backlash on social media from certain circles about a woman who identifies as Black Nigerian Jewish working class being cast as a late medieval Queen of England. And I was thinking to myself, well, yeah, I think it's brilliant casting. It's bold casting for sure. Um, and I was also, the subtext of this poem is, well, yes, I feel absolutely outraged for Sophie, the way that dialogue went in certain directions. But equally, I wanted to do honour to her and also consider at
Yeah,
the time my own privilege and my own sense of whose voice am I speaking in? Do I have the right to speak with somebody else's voice, whether that's Margaret or any of the other women in this book, including, I don't feel that I do speak for Sophie, but I certainly admire her as a strong woman and an amazing actress. And so this was my almost my tribute to her to say, I'm not speaking for Sophie by no means, but I see in the way that Sophie has portrayed Queen Margaret and the way that has been perceived in certain quarters as an illustration of much broader ideas about how dare a woman step out of her lane in any
yeah,
way.
no, I
Um,
agree.
and but I felt the reason I felt she was so perfect for that role was because of that status as an outsider, as a non-conventional choice. So was Margaret, and so therefore it was perfect casting from my point of view.
Yeah, I agree with you. Sometimes I think the problems we have is prejudice creep up sometimes and stuff. And if you're not done it the way everyone's done it in the past, you automatically react. And like I'm a massive fan of Doctor Who, and at the moment, and that's having a lot of trouble at the moment, as you can guess, for the
Mm.
casting on it. So yeah, sometimes they've got to look, as I said, they've got to look beyond what you visualize the context of it. You've got to look at how good the person and how what they can bring to the table with it. No, great idea indeed. Now, the next, I've got two more I want to ask you about in this book, and I'm conscious I don't want this net crashing on us again. We've had two crashes already. So, but yeah, I want to talk about next about the assassination of Queen Margaret by the talented Mr. Shakespeare. Now, I've got to say, I love the sarcasm in the title on this one. This is what made me want to ask you about this one. Now, obviously, first of all, with this one, then, obviously, it's brilliant. How did you structure this poem then?
Yeah, so this poem is looked at from, yeah, it's a kind of looking at Shakespeare as a young upcoming playwright. So he's not made his bones yet. He's still very much in need of patronage and support from the nobles and other players who might be able to finance his burgeoning playwright career. So I was imagining him grappling with this amazing female character in his early plays. So he wrote Henry VI plays quite early on. There's a lot of debate around how much he had help with that writing, which I won't go into, but I should just nod to that and
Yeah,
say
agreed.
that was not part of the story that I wanted to tell. So for the purposes of this poem, it's Shakespeare on his own grappling with Queen Margaret. And Margaret had over 4 plays, more lines than any other female character in Shakespeare's plays, and probably more lines actually than many of his male heroes. Whether he saw Margaret as a hero, heroine, or not is debatable, but he certainly seems to have recognised that she needed to have quite a prominent role across a number of plays, and he even gave her lines and a role in Richard III, which, in historical terms, plays after Margaret had actually passed away. So he kind of reinvigorates her. He raises her from the dead for that purpose. So yeah, I thought it was a really interesting part of Margaret's story, and also this is where she gets her reputation through to the current day as the She-Wolf of France,
Yeah.
from Shakespeare. So I wanted to highlight some of the reasons he might have done that to Margaret as a character, but also recognise that she absolutely is deserving as a completely complicated, contradictory woman of her place in the Shakespeare canon, as it were.
Yeah.
And then it just, there's not, I tend to write mainly, although we've discussed a lot of the more form-based poems, I do tend to write a lot just free verse. And this one is really sort of falling into that latter camp where I tend to be led by either the character, the story, the images. There'll be something that I want to put front and center of my poem. And in this case, that was Shakespeare at his desk grappling with his second best paper and mediocre pounce. Pounce is the drying sand or material that you would, after you've written in your lovely ink with your quill, you'd then sand it to dry it quickly. And of course, he's a young playwright. He doesn't have money, so he's got second best paper and mediocre pounce.
Perfect. No, I agree with you on that. Now, the last poem I want to ask you about this collection, and this is the one character I hadn't come across before. But it's an unbelievable story. It was Anne Green.
Mm.
And I'll read out what you said at the top of the book in top of this poem in italics. It's Anne Green Criminal. And this is I'm going to apologise, people, for the shocking nature of this, but this is history, this. Anne Green, 1628 to 1665, was convicted of murdering a miscarried child and somehow survives execution by hanging. Unbelievable story.
Mm.
So, obviously, before we touch on very briefly about the structure of this piece, there's obviously something you play around with, I can say as well. How do you find out about this story?
I just read a lot of history.
Yeah, it
Read a
shows
lot of history,
it's
particularly women's history. And when I say women's history, it's just part of history, and it's a part which tends to be, or has tended to be over many years, sidelined. Um, with Anne, I was looking for this third part of the book to bring stories to light that some would be better known and others less known. Anne is a woman who was living in the early to mid 17th century in Oxfordshire. She was a servant, so she had no political power, no economic power. She was in a sexual relationship with the son of the house, her master's son. How much she had a say in that, we don't know. And she fell pregnant, miscarried the child while she was at work, and didn't know what to do. So she did what she needed to do when the baby was stillborn. She was unmarried. It would be a huge scandal, and probably result in her being ostracized from her society. So what could she do? She was found out. She was accused and executed for the child's murder because miscarriage was not well understood. It still is under researched in terms of the way miscarriage is handled today. And of course, I was very much thinking about the US and the kind of direction of travel for women's rights. Even today, women have been criminalized for pregnancy loss. And so Anne's story spoke to me. It's one of those which was very clearly to me a direct link between a woman of the past and what's going on at the moment. It's another one where I had to think very hard about how to tell the story and not to be a bystander just kind of going, oh, wasn't that terrible? But I felt like it was doing Anne justice to tell her story and to also honour those women who are still going through similar ostracisation and criminal accusations today.
agreed. It's a powerful piece, powerful story that one indeed. So I'm conscious of the time here now, unfortunately, for a few reasons
Yeah.
outside spoken label territory. So we're gonna have to wrap up part one here. But before we do that, do you have any more books planned for the future, Lucy? Anything else you want to talk about?
Yeah, for the rest of this year, I mean, you will know it's nice when you've had a book
Hmm.
published to have that slight lull because it's an intensive process and then you get to the point of, oh, she's out there in the world. And now it's really talking about Daughter of Fire. And yeah, the launch event, the in-person launch event has just happened with Yaffle Press in Yorkshire a couple of weeks ago. There'll be an online launch later in the year with some exciting guests who I'm currently lining up. And then, yeah, various collaborations. I'm doing another collaboration with Yaffle later on in this year and into next year. And I'm reading at Cheltenham Poetry Festival in May, 7th
Oh,
of May, with Ruth Padell, my absolute poetry hero, so who inspired the structure of the book. So slightly nervous and terrified, but also really excited to be doing that. And then, so yeah, various things going on in support of Daughter of Fire for the rest of this year and into next year. I'm already thinking about what to write next, and that's positive because for me, after the last two books, I fell into this lull of not writing for a while. And the good news is this time I'm still having ideas. I'm still putting pen to paper, not every day, but more often than not. So I've got a batch of drafts to be working on, and I'm sure they'll find their way into a manuscript. But I'm not in any rush. You know, this book took the best part of 4 years. I'm very proud of her. Oh, my camera's gone Funny, sorry. I'm really proud of her and so grateful to Yaffle Press for the opportunity to bring Margaret's story into fresh new light, to reconsider her and talk about women's experiences through history and also through to today. So I'm going to rest on my laurels for a bit.
Yeah,
And
rest is a good. Well, I like the word rest in it. Yeah, you need to
yeah,
sometimes, definitely. So, no, brilliant
yeah.
stuff. Good luck with this book. Definitely, I look forward to hearing more about it. So,
Thank
no.
you.
So to wrap up, then, where can people get hold of the book first of all?
So it's available two places at the moment online. One is via Yaffle's website, and they've got a section of collections. So it should be top of that page at the moment as their newest release. And if anybody would like a signed copy, I have my box of books and can send signed copies in the UK or EU or worldwide. Happy to do that. Everybody also gets, I always do a bookmark with my books. So there's a Daughter of Fire bookmark, which comes with. So if you don't come for the poetry, come for the bookmark.
That
But hopefully
sounds
you'll come for
brilliant.
the poetry.
Of course, definitely that. So, now, obviously, where can people track you down, Lucy, on social media if they want to order a book off you?
Yes. So, well, I'm not on X anymore. I'm on Blue Sky, and that is at Petite Creature One. So, Petite Creature One dot bsky.social, because that was Margaret's childhood nickname. So that's me.
Brilliant, brilliant.
And then my website. Maybe you put it in the show notes or what
I
have
will.
you.
Yeah, I'll find it.
Yeah,
So that's fine. So
great.
brilliant. Great stuff, Lucy. Okie dokie. Yeah, buddy. We're going to wrap up part one now, and I'm going to get Lucy to do a few poems for us on part two. And then we're going to hang out with the kids later on TikTok. So, of course, thank you again, Lucy. We'll see everybody in two shakes of the dice.
Thanks, Andy.